Waidehi Gilbert-Gokhale, who is the Director of Partnerships and Development and Soliya, will share with us about her experience. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to Build Peace for involving Soliya in this amazing conference. I was actually going to start by saying I unfortunately missed all the Ignite talks yesterday. So now I don't have to say that because I actually saw one. And I was going to say that I was introduced to the Ignite format very recently, and I find it very exhilarating. I find you become excited for the whole 5 minutes, which is amazing. And I had the pleasure of being audience to the panels that were here yesterday. And I think that when we all do the work we do, sometimes it's very re-energizing to convene and recognize that there is so much diversity and so much energy in this game of peace building. So anyway, just another thank you to the organizers. As Michaela mentioned, I work with Soliya, and we are a not-for-profit organization founded in 2002. Our work aims to empower young people to change how our societies deal with difference, moving us from a coercive and confrontational methodology to one that is defined more by collaboration and compassion. We do this by running global exchange programs, dialogue exchange programs, as well as training programs. So the question is, why would an organization feel the need to do something like this? So I'd like you to take a moment to consider the state of the world today. And I would say that it's defined by an unparalleled interdependence, and that all the challenges of the 21st century will require people to work in multilateral ways to reach solution, be they security, environment, economics, certainly not telling you anything you don't already know. And I think that it's easier today than ever before to have access to, be exposed to other people and information. And my experience has been that people have one of two responses to this interconnectedness. People either see it as an amazing opportunity or as a threat. And I would say that for the sake of the well-being of our world, it would be less than optimal if more people had the threat response than the opportunity response. And so given that then, it seems imperative that we ensure that young people are empowered with the skills required to deal with these challenges in a collaborative way. So before I go into the history of the organization and how we fit into the landscape of the peace-building work that everybody's doing, I'm going to move from the universal to the particular for a moment and talk a little bit about me. I think it's helpful for you to understand how my story leads me to be speaking about this and how my story leads me to Soliya. As with many others, I have had the privilege of having a very multinational background. A couple of folks I was having conversations with just prior to coming in here were asking me, you know, where are you from? How do you come to this? So I was born in India, spent some of my childhood there. I lived for a time on a ship, sailing across the world. My father was a marine engineer. I then grew up most of my life, actually, in Hong Kong, whilst it was still a British colony. I then spent some time in the UK. I worked in Singapore. I lived and worked in Boston for about 8 years. I then moved to Toronto. I was there for about 7 years and have recently moved back to the United States. So the notion of engaging with people across borders, across difference, has been my narrative for my life. As a result of this multinational background, I have family practically on every continent, as I'm sure many of you do as well. Through this history, my fascination with how two people or two groups engage with one another and experience that exchange has been of deep fascination and interest. I think that growing up in a place like Hong Kong cements that. Anybody have experience with Hong Kong? Anybody grow up in Hong Kong? Just for visits, right. So everybody has an affinity to the place you grew up in often. So, please understand that I speak from personal experience and don't mean to make vast generalizations. However, the Hong Kong that I grew up in was incredibly unique. It was a deeply interracial, cosmopolitan, multinational population. It's an odd island. I mean, even topographically, it's sort of this giant rock that got carved into over the years. And it has this vibrancy and energy to it that, having lived in many other places, I've never experienced again. It meant that there was always a lot of change. I was an international resident. Whoa, sorry. I just bumped right into the mic. I was an international resident, so it meant that people came and went a lot. So it was transient. You had to really embrace the notion of change. It was cosmopolitan. My graduating class in high school, small, 60-odd students representing 30 nationalities. So difference was proximate, and it was a daily phenomenon. You had people around you represented diaspora, which has a very specific ring to it. My friends spoke various different languages. People traveled, whether within the region or to their home countries. And we used to have, for as long as I can remember, we used to delve into really divisive conversations representing ourselves, our families, our backgrounds, and come up, and we were still friends. So going from the sort of exchange of people to extrapolating that to the relationships between nations became my key area of interest. And so as a kid, if you asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I had the very reachable goal of becoming Secretary General of the United Nations. And why not? I didn't make it, but that's beside the point. My first experiences of living and working in the north of England and North America were very eye-opening for me. I met, for the first time, some people who had not, and nor did they have any desire to travel or have experiences that were strange to that which they already knew, which was, given my background, fairly astonishing. And it was around this time that I remember wading into the waters of what I define as a difficult conversation. And it was just a casual conversation with a fellow student who was native to the United Kingdom, and he said to me, oh, I like you, and I think we get along just fine, and it's because I don't even see you as different. I don't even think of you as different. And I was very offended and baffled by why I was offended. I found myself angry. I didn't really know why. And I found myself not wanting to engage with them anymore, and yet burning with the desire to drive into the curb of this conversation. And so I did, and it was tumultuous and ugly and probably not handled very well by me, but I've had this conversation repeatedly over the years with myriad people in myriad places. It's relatively awkward, often difficult, but almost always incredibly thought-provoking, both for myself and for the person that I've exchanged with. And I think that in that conversation with that particular person, what was difficult was trying to help him to understand why I would rather that he grapple with the difference and digest and navigate and understand and recognize it, rather than for it to be comfortable to him to blindly overlook it. And for that necessity to be there in order for us to, quote unquote, get along. this, again, as I say, my fascination with people and engagement continues to grow and swell. By this time, I begin a career in counseling psychology here in Massachusetts. I worked as a counselor in high schools, public high school systems in and around the Boston area. And again, adding to my little backpack of engagement and people, it sounds simple, but the truth is how people feel and how they think impacts what they do. And what was key for me was understanding that narratives are closed down and doors are closed very, very early on. And the notion of another's experience can very quickly be relegated to irrelevance in one's life unless there is that notion of fostering that very early on and understanding that very early on. So now I sort of had a fairly robust toolkit, but what was missing for me at the professional level was the international realm. And so I went back to graduate school and attended the Fletcher School here, and went into a career in international development. But really, to be honest, by this point, I was biding my time. I had encountered an organization through volunteering with them, whom I saw as the perfect place for me. I thought of them as the ideal realm to bring together my tools as well as my passions. And what they were doing is they were running a program to empower young people to navigate, deal well with difference, and change the way people collaborate. And so this organization, of course, being Soliya. So the history of Soliya. Soliya was founded by, how many people are familiar with us, by the way? Oh, good, hello. We were founded by two young entrepreneurial spirits who were very, each in their own way, before they met, driven to make a change in what was a post-9/11 narrative here in the United States. And their imperative was, we need to bring young people from the United States and broadly the Arab world in constructive dialogue. Mission-driven, they won an award and seeded a project, which then turned into an organization. And it was done in the hope of demystifying and moving people past a narrative that was very loud and emanating from all walks of life. It was coming in from the political realm, the social realm, and certainly from the media. And so they recognized that there was an urgent need to change the narrative of us or them to the narrative of us and them. And they also recognized that this exposure for young people to cross borders and engage with one another was not very common, and certainly not common across the divides that they were particularly interested in. So, apart from leisure travel, the only other real means of going abroad was studying abroad. Anybody study abroad? Pretty good. Often when I say that in a room, you'd get a hand. And to be honest, this is atypical, obviously, because if you survey the population of study abroad, you get about 1% to 2% of the population. It's prohibitively expensive, and not very many people do it. And then of the people that do it, about 10% go anywhere other than North America, Europe, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So these folks were very keen to move the needle on who was getting to access whom. And then in the meantime, the world had moved into this media space, and the internet had blown up, and everybody suddenly had access to everybody else. And the access to information was unprecedented. You had the number of sources you could access, the ease with which you could access had changed. You'd moved from flat content to conversation because people were engaging online, and connectivity. Not everywhere, obviously, but in many places. But what was happening was, even though the sources of information and the access to those sources was vast, you were finding that people would, instead of doing that, they were doing that. So people were seeking information from places that already aligned with their thinking, and sitting in those silos quite happily, and not really doing the cross-pollination. And so the imperative was to figure out how to ensure that people were seeking non-familiar information. And then the other thing was, as well as the information silos, the other issue was this. So interaction online, if it was asynchronous, it was often a very fast race to a very acrimonious place. And one need only look as far as any chat box at the bottom of any website, comment boxes, to recognize how quickly that happens. And so for Liza and Lucas, our founders, it was really clear that technology was certainly a very powerful tool, but there was a real need to ensure that people were using it well. So you had to move people from their information silos, from polarized exchanges and communities of the like-minded. And you had to figure out how to garner the breadth of media technology and combine it with the depth of an actual exchange experience. And thus, they designed what we call our flagship program, which is the Connect program. The Connect program is a tech-enabled, facilitated dialogue program that combines the depth of exchange with the breadth of new technology. Our application is Flash-based, and so it's pretty light. And because of that, we've been able to go fairly wide around the world. At 10 years, we've now implemented with 100 institutes of higher learning in about 30 different countries across the Middle East, North Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and the United States, Europe, and Canada. The way this works is you've got, for those of you who were in the impact panel yesterday will have seen a slide like this in Emile Bruneau's presentation. That's what our rooms look like. You have 8 to 10 students from around the world. Ideally, no 2 institutions or countries are ever represented. You've got 2 trained facilitators. The groups meet for 2 hours a week for between 8 to 10 weeks as part of a course that they take at their Institute of Learning. They can hear each other, they can see each other, they can use that chat box, which is common to them. They can also private chat with one another. There are a few different tools. There's a whiteboard, a polling tool. There's also a timer, which doesn't appear on this particular iteration. And they are encouraged to engage deeply with one another. The facilitators are provided with a curriculum, which is mostly just resources, but there is a skeletal roadmap in there. The idea is that the group takes real ownership of their own discussion process, which means that when we run a program of 450 students, we have approximately 50 groups, and each group has organically a very different experience. So I think it might help if you'd allow me to show you a brief video clip at this point. And this is students from Georgetown University discussing their experience of the Connect program.
At first, we were all really polite and really quiet and very well-mannered and respectful, trying to tiptoe around conversations.
I thought a lot of the conversations that we had were really going to be, I guess, shallow conversations. But by the 3rd session, the Connect program definitely took off even more than I thought it would.
That dinner table feel started coming up because people weren't afraid to be like, whoa, I do not agree with anything you just said, and let me tell you why.
You actually had someone's actual opinion of the Arab Spring rather than just hearing CNN or hearing Fox News or reading it in the paper. You actually could hear, like, hey, this is how my family was affected, this is how I was affected, and then you can make your own judgment from there.
We sometimes talk about what has been called signature pedagogies in education, and one of those, I believe, is virtual exchange. The idea that students would have the experience of practicing empathetic listening, critical empathy, to develop a critical distance on their own beliefs through that kind of dialogue. I believe that has to be an intrinsic part of what we consider liberal education going into the future.
Before the program, I was afraid to really share differences in opinion. So I would be that person who would go, yes, I agree, I understand. Or I would just stay quiet and just listen. But Soliya made me a little more courageous.
I would just listen to what they were saying. And it would just make me, I guess, question my government more. And that's how I really became interested in politics here. It's because I really want to create coexistence and create understanding with politics.
By far the most underdeveloped area of new technologies in the current landscape is the use of technologies to advance social learning. Right? Students are using social media all the time for their personal lives. We know very little in higher education how to make use of the social dimension in learning to create depth, to create engagement.
There was one student, he went by Kaki. He was from Egypt, and in terms of my political ideology and beliefs, we were pretty much as different could be, but it was one of the most rewarding experiences to just be able to have a conversation with him where it was direct, it was honest, it made it so much more real and tangible. And now when I read the news on Egypt or the Middle East, I try to say, okay, well, Kaki told me this. Let me see how I can digest this.
Whether these people will be in your life 5, 10 years from now, I can't really say. Some may not, but the impact that they had on your life will always be there. When I go home, and I hear my friends say certain things about the Middle East or say certain things about Europe or just people who are different, I'm definitely quick to correct them.
I've had so many friends that I've expressed what the program is about and how much it has helped me, wish that they could have been in the class.
When I think about what the future might be of Georgetown's involvement with Soliya, it is to experiment with and expand that kind of virtual exchange as a signature pedagogy of liberal education, and to think about how that kind of virtual exchange integrates with the other foundational experiences that we try to give students.
I feel like everyone throughout the country should have that mode of access to expand what they know, push the borders on what they're comfortable with, and be willing to be vulnerable, to admit fault and ignorance and learn.
So I think one of the key elements of that for me is that notion of transference. So these students are having the experiences in the rooms, but then they're having the conversations back within their communities. They're having the conversations with their families, their peers. And nobody's purporting to change ideologies or change political leanings, but people are talking about diving into those conversations and experiencing what it means to have that conversation with someone else. So just given that we're talking about using technology, I just want to give you a little bit more detail about the technology. As I said, it's a Flash-based application. It makes it very light. What we do have as well is a diagnostic entry portal. So when you log on, it runs an immediate diagnostic on your technology. And if you are above a certain range of bandwidth, et cetera, and it's clear that your user experience won't be diminished, it puts you straight into the room. Otherwise, it puts you into a tech room where live tech support will come in and work with you until such a time that it feels like you could go in and have a reasonable experience. So what do the students learn? Well, they spoke for themselves, and I do have, just to give you the full picture, I have a short video clip of students in a university in Egypt as well, which I think you'll find very enlightening. But in general, my experience is these students, they lean into these conversations, they expose themselves to one another in a really meaningful way. they learn about their own, the origin of their own narratives, their own insights, their own biases, stereotypes. They learn to represent those in a respectful way. They learn to express their opinion in a respectful way, but most importantly, they learn to listen, and they learn to hear other people's opinions, and to accept that there is a space in which both can coexist, whether they agree or disagree. And watching that year in and year out is very powerful. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the fact that by using technology and by working with institutions, one of the things that we feel we're able to do well is sustainably reach populations that you wouldn't otherwise reach, which sounds awkward when you're talking about working with universities. But the truth is that in many places, for example, in places like Pakistan or Egypt, when you're trying to reach more remote or underrepresented populations, the one place where they would have access and where they would have a reliable sort of ability to join something like this is an institute. So one of our biggest programming countries is Egypt, and we've been very lucky to build some amazing partnerships in two governorates, one being Munafeya, which is up in the north, and the other being Minya. And Minya, and if anybody's been following everything that's been going on in Egypt, you'll hear these names come up a lot over the last couple of years. Minya being a governorate which has a very high population of, a very high minority Christian population. So again, a segment of the population that's very important in this dialogue, both from a in-country and global perspective. As well in Egypt, we've been able to work with Al-Azhar University, where they had the people who attended our program were imams in training. And then, of course, with the more mainstream population of something like an American university in Cairo. And so the educational impact that we see coming out of our program, students develop empathy, communication skills, cross-cultural collaboration skills. They're inspired, they're motivated, and they build relationships. And based on those, they pivot how they then function within their own communities and beyond. I am going to play you this video because I do think it's worthwhile.
I'm from Munafeya. It's a very hospitable place to live in, to raise kids in. Not very economical place. We have to travel out of it to have a nice job. In Soliya program, you learn how to communicate with outsiders, people from another culture maybe, and that's very essential to us.
At the beginning, I was just like, okay, I will go to Connect program so I can speak with natives, improve my language, that's it. I'm not gonna learn anything from them.
From the first moment, I expect to be, or to play the role of defender of my country and my Islam and my religion.
My expectations were around fighting with each other and fighting with people who are not in the same background.
At first, some people didn't want to speak, you know, just sit there and listen. Maybe I will type and chat later. And, you know, everyone is looking to the camera, I'm over there. But by the time we got used to it and got the butterfly out of our stomachs, it was great.
The group was so awesome, by the way. We were 8 from different countries. Britain, Italy, Canada, America, and Pakistan, of course. But we found that we are understanding each other.
After I'm done, I go tell my mother, well, we did speak about women's role in society. So what do you think your role in society?
Every single day, I end the Soliya's program session, and Joshua said that, Muhammad said that. Every single thing in the conversation was discussed one more time with my family.
We just had a different point of views. You know, you think that is good and I think that's bad. Then why? Let's talk it. And we disagreed, but we disagreed about idea.
The main thing I learned from Soliya's program that we need the main key to communicate with another person is the respect.
I used to be bad-tempered. I used to get angry quick, but after this program, I try to take it easy. Try to understand. Try to listen first, and then you don't have to judge. Okay, just listen and understand. Take it easy. This is what has changed to me.
We can read books everywhere. Books everywhere. You can get information from books, but when you get it from the person himself, it's completely different.
There is the social networks, there is the open internet, but this deep experience, this deep sharing of ideas, never in other community or other program. Soliya gets deep to you and make you know yourself better and the other as well. I didn't have this power before to go and search for that place and go for it. Now I have. I know how to deal with the different people, with different culture, with different backgrounds. Now I have the power to do it.
So again, reiterating the themes of learning, listening, taking the learning back to having conversations within their communities across difference. In my first facilitation group, I had a student from the nether parts of Maine and another student from the Middle East. And the young man from Maine was an avid supporter of George W. Bush. He believed in the politics, the foreign policy, the domestic policies, and he was very vocal about it. And the student from the Middle East was also from a conservative background who dealt with checkpoints on a daily basis, had a very strong opinion about her social and family history, and was in opposition to a lot of the policies that this young man was advocating vehemently for. And they would observe each other like they were creatures in two zoo exhibits. You know, they came from entirely different worlds. And through the process of that program, they pushed each other. They really did, to listen, to ask, to try and understand, partly because they were so baffled. And if you recall my fascination with people engaging with each other, I wanted to pop popcorn. This was amazing, you know? I was watching people truly get into it. So these two students, in our final session in the last round, they exchanged contact information and vowed to keep in touch. And the following year, when I touched base with the professor at UMM to inquire about their engagement with the Connect program again, he mentioned this student and said, listen, I wanted you to know, he wrote me a note saying after graduation, he's planned a trip to the region. This was a kid who wouldn't cross the border to go to Canada, even though he was doing that because he was angry with Canada not going in. He was the student who very openly called them freedom fries and not French fries. Once that, I mean, this is that kid, and he went to the region. Now, just before Christmas, I had a conversation with the same professor who's now at a different university and has brought the Connect program to that university, and we were recollecting this student, and he said, oh, do you know what? We kept in touch about 5 years after he graduated, and at least for as long as we kept in touch, I know that they kept in touch. So what's remarkable is, did either of them change their minds about politics or who they would vote for? Probably not. But what they did do was have exposure enough that the next time one of them reads in a paper about X person in Y country, they're going to make an association to a human being. And they're going to make an association with a name attached to it. It was kind of like the young woman was saying in the Georgetown video. When she reads about something, she thinks of her friend from her group and what he might say or do. So I think that, I can't be sure, but I would say that the learning endures. So over the years, I've watched students in ROTC fatigues talking to imams. I've also watched a Lebanese student be completely mind blown by a Jordanian student, and a student from DC have a very heated discussion with a student from Western Kentucky. So it doesn't have to be cross a border. It just has to be cross a line of difference. And it comes up over and over again. The other thing that happens is when our program is running, the world is doing stuff. So, you know, I've got a session ready for a day, and 5 minutes before the session, everywhere you see video of Saddam Hussein's statue coming down. My plan for the day is gone. I know what we'll be discussing. You've got Indonesian and Dutch students about to go into rooms tomorrow, and the fitna film breaks. You know, last year, as Emil said yesterday, our program was running when the Boston bombings happened. And these things come into the rooms. They get discussed, they get ripped apart. You know, people have very divergent opinions, and they spend the time and energy to engage in those conversations. Groups vary vastly, of course, and it's not just politics. You know, they'll discuss the role of women, the role of religion, power, the environment. They'll discuss their grandmothers, coffee, music. We've had cookbooks that have been collaboratively made. So it's not just about the discussion, it's about building of those relationships as well. And then just briefly to tell you, Soliya's second program is a facilitation training program. And we run 30 hours of training. The demographic for this program is a little bit older. It tends to be graduate students and beyond, so early mid-career professionals as well. And we train them, and once they are successfully trained, they facilitate the dialogue. So that's the opportunity that they get. And so what? So we do this and we do that, and so what? There's, you know, a plethora of technology-enabled learning going on now. Cross-border access, incredibly increased. So what is it that we do that's different? Now, we've always been committed to evaluation really deeply. Evaluation in the social sciences, never an easy thing to do. But we have done survey evaluations ourselves, pre, mid, post, a lot of it, with all constituents, and taken it very seriously, the experience of the partners and the participants, and made iterative structural and pedagogical changes to make sure that we were meeting the needs of what we were trying to do. And then a few years ago, our paths crossed with Dr. Rebecca Sachs and Dr. Emil Bruno, who run the Sachs lab here at MIT. And they really liked the idea of this and said, we would like to help you to develop tools to measure your impact. Voila, okay. And so since then, they've been working with us to ask the primary question of what do we measure, and then how do we measure it? And you know, the bar is high. You're setting them targets of intangibles. We'd like to measure empathy. We'd like to measure relationship building. Nothing easy. And so we've been working very hard with them to do this. And our hope is that we develop some tools that are transferable to other programs and people who are doing this technology-based peace building. And so, as Emil said yesterday, and I won't repeat for so many of you who are probably here, but the biggest thing that we have to do is run control groups, which is very difficult. But without that, we have no validity measures. So one of our first control group findings was from the Boston bombings, and it was about the students from within and without the program, and then compared 4 months on to see sort of the endurance of the learning. And then the other measure that we've been doing is experiencing respect, recognizing that dominant and non-dominant groups, you have to measure different stuff. And so working with them to ensure that we're measuring the right stuff with the right folks at the right time in the right ways. And so the next game coming up is cross-cultural communication skills. And then a couple of theories that we're working on them with that they brought to us, actually, is the idea that this program, unlike an exchange program that's physical, is you're changing the picture from massed learning to spaced learning. So these people are engaging globally but sitting locally. And so it allows for that digestion, it allows for that distillation, it allows for that turn back. Okay, I'm here, I'm with you guys, you know, and then I'm talking to my grandma. And then I'm coming back to you guys. And then I'm talking to my friends. And what that does in terms of building that learning, we're finding is very, very powerful. And then virtual contact theory, I'm sure everyone's familiar with traditional contact theory, the idea that exposure to the other is the best means of improving relations. And so we are out to prove that it's translatable to virtual contact. And so far, things are looking pretty good. So that's the so what. You know, in terms of what we've achieved so far, I think that it's clear to us that the experience of this program is giving people an experience of the other that they cannot tangibly have in any other way. I think the uniqueness of this program is really evident to us. And so the last thing to talk about are challenges, and then I will stop. So challenges. I've mentioned some of them already. You know, the language. The program conducts itself in English. We have Arabic-speaking facilitators in almost every room. Doesn't help you when you're programming in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Indonesia. So we find that working with institutions helps in that realm. We also work with English language institutions as a result. And then the other piece is preaching to the elite. Again, I touched on it. And so what we try and do is just be very mindful in our outreach. So we seek out connections with rural institutions, public institutions, technical institutions, so that you're getting the students that are not just in mainstream higher education. And then evaluation. Even with the fantastic partnership that we have, ensuring that there's validity, ensuring that we can actually say we do this stuff is resource heavy. And then, of course, there's everything that we all deal with, which is volatility. So you lose political buy-in, you lose social buy-in, a revolution happens, you have rolling blackouts. So these are all the things that we constantly have to contend with. So that's that. And then to tell you a little bit about the future. We think of ourselves as being members of a field called virtual exchange. We've been trying to raise this field through advocacy work. We've been trying to determine pools of funding to the field. We've joined forces with two other organizations who also do virtual exchange, iEarn and Global Nomads Group. Together we are the Exchange 2.0 Coalition. More a campaign, less a coalition, but we work together to raise the profile of others also working in this field. And then Soliya's future, which many of you may have heard about, we recently announced that we'll be joining forces with Search for Common Ground. We will come together as one organization at the tail end of this year. We're very excited about this, bringing our programming into the search ecosystem and allowing for sustainable scale. As a small organization, we've worked on this niche of, broadly speaking, predominantly Muslim societies and the West, but we feel like our programming model and our dialogue model has much applicability globally. So we look forward to our growth, frankly. So there you have it. We're not a MOOC. We're not a social network. We're not a chat room. But we are an organization trying to build peace, build sustainable peace using technology, and a peace that's chosen and owned by the people that are involved. So I thank you.